The tea was still warm when Eleanor Price vanished from her small home on Masonboro Loop Road in Wilmington, North Carolina, population 89,213. The morning of October 8, 1996, arrived with damp sea fog and a cold wind blowing through the old pine trees. At 7:42 a.m., her granddaughter, Lauren Ellis, called as usual, but heard only the long ring of the phone in the quiet void. When Lauren stopped by, the back door was ajar, the radio still played the morning show, and the little dog barked hoarsely from the porch. On the kitchen table, the teacup steamed faintly. The chair swayed slightly, as if someone had just stood up, with no signs of a struggle or anything taken. What happened in the hours that followed would haunt Wilmington with an unspoken dread for nearly 3 decades. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the morning of October 8, 1996, Wilmington, North Carolina, woke to a thin fog and humid sea air. At the end of Masonboro Loop Road, Eleanor Price's small house had its kitchen light on as it did every morning. The 81-year-old widow was known in the neighborhood for her habit of brewing tea early and calling her granddaughter Lauren Ellis before listening to the weather report. But that morning, the phone in Lauren's house rang unanswered. She tried twice more, hearing only the cold, distant tone. By 8:30, Lauren drove to her grandmother's house, the quiet road shrouded in fog, the grass still wet. The front door was locked, curtains drawn, but the back door was slightly open, the wooden frame scraping softly against the wall. Inside, the small radio played Buddy Weeset's morning program, the announcer's voice steady in the silent kitchen. On the table, the teacup was warm, faint steam rising and dissolving into the dim light. A chair swayed gently, as if someone had just left it. No signs of a struggle, the floor clean, belongings untouched, keys and wallet still in place. The little dog barked relentlessly in the yard, its sharp cries fading into intermittent whimpers. Lauren called her grandmother's name, checked every room, opened every door, finding only the familiar traces of a routine life. An old photo frame on the shelf, a thin jacket hung behind the door, a calendar stopped on the previous day. An emptiness turned to dread as she realized no trace of life remained in the house. Lauren ran to the porch, used the landline to call again, listening to the ring while hoping for footsteps in response. But only the phone's repetitive chime echoed through the empty house, resonating down the hallway before fading into the thick silence of the October morning. At 9:17, her trembling hands dialed the Wilmington police, saying only, "My grandmother is gone." The first Wilmington Police Department patrol car arrived at Masonboro Loop Road at 9:40 a.m. 2 officers stepped out into the cold wind, their boots crunching on dew-covered grass. Lauren met them on the porch, her face pale with worry, her voice shaking as she recounted everything. No signs of a break-in, no strange noises, just the open back door and the warm teacup. Lieutenant Kevin Moore, leading the initial response, signaled his team to secure the area around the house. Yellow tape was strung along the fence, and 2 officers set up "Do Not Cross" signs. Neighbors began to gather, confused faces watching as a forensics van arrived, its radio antenna crackling in the damp air. The small house became the center of a search no one wanted to believe was real. The investigation team noted every detail in the first few minutes. The back door wasn't forced, the lock intact, no strange footprints on the kitchen floor. They found a faint handprint on the brass doorknob, too smudged to identify. An officer bent down to examine the teacup, noting the estimated time, around 7 a.m., based on the remaining liquid's temperature. "She couldn't have gone far if she left after brewing tea," Moore said quietly, his gaze shifting to the backyard. Beyond the wooden fence was an empty lot leading to a marshy forest where the smell of salt water mixed with decaying leaves. By 11 a.m., rescue vehicles and New Hanover County's volunteer search team arrived. They brought bloodhounds, radios, topographic maps, and heat sensors. Lauren leaned against the porch post, hands clasped tightly, watching them set up a mobile command post on the front lawn. Each searcher was assigned an area: the garden, the dirt path to the small lake eastward, and the forest half a mile away. Moore's first order was simple. We assume Mrs. Price is alive. Focus on footprints, clothing, or personal items. The bloodhounds sniffed around the house, tails drooping as they reached the back fence. One barked twice, paused, and sniffed the ground. Moore crouched to inspect a faint mark in the dry mud, possibly a small shoe print, slanted toward the back gate. They marked the area, staked it off, and expanded the search. As the sun rose higher, the air grew humid and stifling. A helicopter circled overhead, its blades stirring the thinning fog. On the ground, dozens of searchers fanned out eastward, calling Eleanor's name while scanning every blade of grass. At noon, police set up a rest tent beside the command vehicle. Lauren sat inside, answering questions. Did she have any medical conditions? Who worked in the house? Any threats or grudges? She tried to recall, but everything seemed normal. Eleanor was kind, friendly, still drove herself to the market weekly. My grandmother never went anywhere without telling me, Lauren said, her voice breaking. Moore nodded, but didn't respond. He'd seen too many cases like this. An elderly person went for a walk and vanished, ending somewhere unimaginable. By 3 p.m., too, a searcher found something near the back fence, about 8 meters from the wooden gate. It was an old cream-colored cloth slipper, soaked in mud. Lauren recognized it immediately. Her grandmother's house shoe. Police sealed the evidence, photographed it, and continued scouring the area. Nothing else turned up. No drag marks, no further footprints, no torn fabric. Everything stopped at the lone slipper, lying crooked in the mud, as if deliberately left behind. As the sun set, a faint red glow spread over the waterlogged forest, and the search team narrowed their focus back to the house. The helicopter landed, and the bloodhounds were taken to rest. Moore held a quick briefing. We'll return tomorrow morning. Rain's coming tonight. Don't disturb the tracks. He lingered, staring at the back door, where smeared mud was drying. Lauren sat in a patrol car, watching through the fogged window as the first raindrops fell. By 7 p.m., heavy rain erased all ground traces. The yellow tape around the house sagged, flapping in the wind. The patrol team's radio repeated, negative contact. No sighting. The neighborhood went dark early, only the faint blue light from police cars reflecting on the slick road. In the thick darkness, Eleanor Price's house stood silent, as if swallowing every sound. The first night ended without answers, and the search would resume the next morning, if the rain stopped. The next morning, Wilmington woke to the lingering damp of the previous night's rain. Gray clouds hung low, and a cold, salty wind blew from the sea. At 6:30, police and rescue vehicles returned to Masonboro Loop Road. The dirt path to Eleanor's house was waterlogged, police tires sinking into soft mud. Lieutenant Kevin Moore sipped hot coffee, scanning the wet fence before ordering an expanded search radius of 3 miles. If she left by car, or was taken, we'd see signs, he said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. Volunteers split into 4 groups: north along the main road, east toward the mangrove forest, west to the highway, and south to the intracoastal waterway, where water and marsh blended. The forensics team recreated the previous night's scene, measuring steps from the back door to the fence, then to the mud where the slipper was found. Most traces were gone after the rain. Under the soft mud, only faint grooves remained, as if pressed by something heavy, not deep like footprints, nor uniform like typical tire tracks. A technician knelt, photographed, and used a silicone mold to capture the impression. Bloodhounds returned, noses low, moving slowly through wet grass. Lauren stood on the porch, watching the reflective vested group move along the back road. From afar, radio chatter mixed with the wind. Around 9 a.m., a hound named Ranger stopped, whined, and barked toward the south. The handler signaled a halt. "He's got a scent," he said, over the radio. The team converged, following the dog's lead. The trail crossed the backyard grass, traced the oak trees, and faded at a small dirt path into the forest. Ranger barked briefly, then stopped, looking back at his handler, tail down. The scent ended there, no further trace. Moore knelt, touching the thick mud. A narrow groove ran a few meters, like a tire track blurred by rain. "Looks like someone parked here," he said. Young officer measured and photographed the faint tire mark. Though they couldn't identify the vehicle, they estimated the tire width at 8 inches, smaller than a truck, larger than a standard car. "Maybe a pickup," Moore noted. He listened to distant sounds, a small boat's engine offshore, waves lapping the shore. This path led straight to the intracoastal waterway, where saltwater carved dozens of small channels into the land. If someone wanted to leave without a trace, water was the perfect escape. From noon to afternoon, the search extended another mile along the waterway. Drones scanned the marshes and abandoned wooden piers. Lenses captured overlapping tire tracks, mostly from fishermen or old delivery trucks. But at a dead-end path, where wild grass grew thick, they found 2 fresher parallel tracks, cutting across the old ones. The tracks stopped at the water's edge. Moore stood silently, staring at the shimmering marsh. "If she was taken out here, this is where it ends," he said, almost to himself. The forensics team used shallow water diving gear, scanning a 50-meter radius along the bank. Under the mud, they found a small gray fabric scrap, worn and faded, its origin unclear. It was sealed, labeled #234. As the sun dipped, Moore returned to the command post. The preliminary report was typed quickly. No body, no signs of struggle. Bloodhounds stopped at the dirt path to the intracoastal waterway. Unidentified tire tracks. High likelihood victim was moved from the scene by vehicle. Lauren sat quietly in the car, reading the report through the fogged window. She saw her grandmother's name, E. Price, in bold, then the phrase possible abduction. It felt distant, cold, as if about someone else. Outside, the marsh sank into a gray dusk, reeds bending in the wind. The rescue team packed up, flashlights flickering in the drizzle. By 6 p.m., Moore stood with his team before a map pinned to the command vehicle's hood. Red dots marked searched areas, black lines circled spots to revisit tomorrow. "We'll check this entire route again at first light," he said, tapping the path's end at the waterway. "If someone took her, they came through here." Everyone nodded silently. As night fell, sea fog drifted back into the forest, mingling with cold mist. Rain resumed, pattering on patrol car roofs, smearing red lights. Along Eleanor's back fence, mud traces vanished completely. Police secured the area, adding temporary barriers and sealing the path. Moore was the last to leave, standing in the rain, watching the yellow tape flap, the wind howling through the forest like an endless sigh. The second night closed in silence, with growing suspicion. Eleanor Price didn't leave that house on her own. Someone took her, and the path to the water might hold the answer. On the third morning, Wilmington stirred with the scent of wet earth and the slow roll of patrol cars on Masonboro Loop. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground mottled with mud and tire tracks. Lieutenant Kevin Moore arrived earliest, joined by a new forensics team from Raleigh. They wore white protective suits and rubber gloves, moving around Eleanor Price's small house as if every speck of dust held a clue. Morning light slanted through the window, illuminating the kitchen table where the teacup remained untouched. Moore had ordered it left in place 2 days ago. The steam was long gone, but the faint yellow ring on the saucer remained, a silent marker of an interrupted moment. The first technician began photographing every angle: the back door, kitchen floor, hallway, bedroom. Each spot was marked with small plastic tags next to potential evidence. Moore stood on the porch, reviewing the camera screen, saying softly, "Note the light direction, time, and distance." He knew that in mysterious disappearances, the smallest details, a hair, a mud streak, a dusty fabric scrap, could be the only truth left. The forensics team split in two. One group worked inside the house, the other scoured the backyard. Inside, they collected several unidentified fingerprints from the doorknob and table edge. Under UV light, tiny gray fabric fibers glowed faintly against the chair's upholstery. Each was lifted with sterile tweezers, sealed in numbered bags. Near the back door, a long silver hair was found, stuck in dried mud. Likely Eleanor's, but it was stored carefully, as they couldn't rule out someone dragging her out. In the living room, the armchair where Lauren said Eleanor read the paper was tilted, draped with a blue wool blanket. A gloved technician lifted the blanket's edge, light revealing frayed threads and a faint handprint-like smudge. "Keep it as is. Seal it in an isolation bag," Moore said, watching every move. The slipper found the previous day was placed in a steel tray, cleaned of mud, photographed, and dried in the evidence room. All items were cataloged and signed for on-site, ensuring a tight chain of custody. Outside, the second team sampled soil from 3 spots: the back door, the fence where the slipper was found, and the tire tracks on the dirt path. Each sample was sealed, labeled A, B, C. Moore requested a control sample 50 meters away for mineral comparison in stratigraphic analysis. As the last sample was taken, a technician spotted a small metallic glint in the mud, possibly car paint, pale silver. Under a magnifying glass, it was a 3-layer paint chip, typical of older trucks. It was lifted, placed in a plastic box, and labeled #27B. Near noon, Moore called all neighborhood witnesses for a second round of statements. A middle-aged man, Arthur Nolan, living 2 houses down, recalled that on the morning of the incident, around 6:30, while fetching his paper, he saw a light-colored pickup parked near the dirt path's turn. "I didn't see the driver," he said. "Just noticed the truck had a covered bed and sounded like an old engine, maybe a Ford or Dodge from the 80s. He added that when he returned inside, the truck was gone. This made Moore glance at his partner, a flicker of tension in his eyes. It was the first detail supporting the suspicion that Eleanor didn't leave alone. Police filed an official report, noting the time, location, witness, and vehicle description. Based on this, they began checking registered light-colored trucks in the Masonboro Loop area from that time. DMV data was requested urgently. Moore leaned against the command vehicle, staring toward the misty marsh. In his mind, pieces were aligning: the slipper, tire tracks, backdoor mud, now the silver paint chip, and a witness to a truck leaving before dawn. By late afternoon, forensics finished collecting evidence. 19 samples were sealed, 5 unidentified fingerprints, and 1 small metallic object, likely car paint. All were sent to the Wilmington Police Department storage for transfer to Raleigh's lab within 24 hours. Moore signed the chain of custody log, sealing the box with the wool blanket, the item he believed might hold the most answers. Before leaving, he looked back at the house. The back door was now sealed with red tape, rain pooling on the wooden frame. Inside, dusk filtered through the window, lighting the table where the teacup once steamed. Everything was still, orderly, as if someone could walk in, sit down, drape the blanket over their shoulders, and resume listening to the radio. But Moore knew the first line typed into his case file set a different course. Case #96221, missing person, suspicious circumstances. By noon, on October 11, 1996, 2 days after case #96221 was opened, Lieutenant Kevin Moore called an urgent meeting at the Wilmington Police Department's investigation room. Crime scene photos were spread across the table: the teacup, wool blanket, mud tracks, silver paint chip. Next to them was a list of those close to Eleanor Price, a dense document of ordinary names, faces that passed her small house on Masonboro Loop Road daily. "We start with anyone who could enter her house without raising suspicion," Moore said, his voice tired but firm. "Family doctor, delivery workers, gardener, close neighbors, and especially anyone with a spare key." One name stood out: Jacob Ellery, a 42-year-old freelance carpenter who repaired Eleanor's porch 3 months earlier. Her notebook held his invoice, neatly written: paid Ellery $80, replaced wood planks. He lived less than 2 miles away, in a quiet riverside neighborhood. Moore nodded. Bring him in for questioning. That afternoon, 2 investigators visited Ellery's home. The small wooden house had a yard full of tools and lumber. He opened the door, tall and lean, hair flecked with gray, hands stained with wood resin. "We're with Wilmington PD," Moore said, showing his badge. "We need to ask about Eleanor Price." Ellery looked briefly surprised, but quickly composed himself. His voice, rough from years of smoking, said, "I heard she went missing. Poor thing. She was kind." Moore asked directly, "Were you at her house in the last 2 days?" "No, I was home all day Monday and Tuesday. Did some work in my shop, watched baseball at night." He gave a faint smile, his eyes drifting. When Moore pressed, "Anyone who can confirm that?" Ellery paused, then said, "No one. I live alone." While talking, Moore noticed Ellery's shoes were caked with dried mud, the same dark brown shade as the soil samples from the scene. He signaled his partner to take note, but kept his tone calm. "We have a witness who saw a light-colored pickup truck leaving the Masonboro Loop area around 6:30 a.m. on the day Mrs. Price disappeared." "What kind of vehicle do you drive, Mr. Ellery?" "Ford F-150. Silver," he replied immediately. "'88 model. But it was parked at my house that day, didn't go anywhere." Moore glanced over Ellery's shoulder, spotting the truck in the backyard, lightly coated in mud, with rainwater still pooled on its bed. The license plate matched the DMV records. Back at the station, the technical team quickly reviewed vehicle registration data for the area. Only 3 silver pickup trucks of that type were recorded around Masonboro that morning. 2 belonged to a transport company, and the third was Jacob Ellery's. "We can't confirm anything yet," Moore said, in a brief evening meeting. "But he's the only one with a connection, a matching vehicle, and a timeline that fits." The next day, investigators visited Ellery's neighbors to verify his statement. An elderly woman, Margaret Hines, living across from him, recalled waking at 6 a.m. to feed her cats and seeing headlights on in Ellery's yard. "I remember because it was still dark, and the lights shone right into my kitchen window," she said. "I thought he was heading to work early." The report was carefully documented, with an estimated time, 6:15 a.m., just 15 minutes before a witness near Price's house saw a light-colored pickup leaving the area. Moore requested phone records and radio signal data from Ellery's home, but found nothing significant. No outgoing or incoming calls during that time frame. Every lid seemed to hit a wall. No search warrant, no direct evidence, and the man's deliberate silence pushed the case into a dead end. By the end of the second week, Moore sat alone in the investigation room, staring at a black-and-white photo of Eleanor Price smiling in her backyard garden. On the table, the final report remained open. Person of interest, Jacob Ellery. 2 weeks after Eleanor's disappearance, Wilmington slowly returned to its routine. But Masonboro Loop Road retained an eerie emptiness. The yellow tape around the house was removed, leaving only faint adhesive marks on the wooden posts and soggy patches of earth where the search had centered. In the investigation room, Lieutenant Kevin Moore sat before a large pinboard, staring at yellowed crime scene photos, red threads connecting locations, the house, the dirt path, the waterway, tire tracks, fabric scraps, a silver paint chip. That was all. No new leads. The Raleigh lab report confirmed no DNA, no matching fingerprints in the system, and the silver paint chip was too small to identify a car make. The case began to grow cold, left with only faint theories and one name lingering in the shadows: Jacob Ellery. Moore brought Ellery in twice more, each time yielding the same result. Ellery was calm, answered clearly, and showed no cracks. He agreed to have his hands and truck photographed, but refused to provide soil or hair samples without an official warrant. The district attorney denied a search warrant due to insufficient physical evidence. By late October, the investigation officially stalled. Moore wrote in the report, "No viable leads, all physical evidence exhausted, subject Ellery, insufficient grounds for warrant." On October 27, a final small-scale search was conducted, with only 5 people and 2 bloodhounds sweeping the waterway area again. They found nothing but debris washed ashore. When the report was filed, Moore silently read the typed conclusion on carbon paper: "Search terminated. Pending further information." A red stamp marked the top corner. The case was temporarily closed. In November 1998, after nearly 2 years with no progress, Eleanor Price's disappearance was reclassified as a cold case, joining hundreds of unsolved cases in New Hanover County. All evidence, the blue wool blanket, teacup, slipper, soil samples, fabric scrap, and silver paint chip, was resealed, labeled, and moved to the county's evidence storage. Moore personally signed the transfer log. He watched the steel evidence box slide deep into the vault, among hundreds of other case files, all neatly stacked, their labels fading over time. The steel door closed with a cold clang, sealing 3 weeks of relentless effort and no answers. In the years that followed, Eleanor Price's case was mentioned only in quarterly summaries, reduced to a few lines. Case #96-221, no updates. Lauren Ellis, her granddaughter, occasionally called the investigation office, asking for news. Moore's response was always the same: "We haven't given up." But he knew that without new evidence or technology, the case would remain missing without cause. In 2003, Kevin Moore left the Criminal Investigation Unit after over 20 years of service. He moved to teaching at the State Police Academy, specializing in crime scene preservation techniques. Before leaving, he spent one last day in the county's evidence storage, reviewing his cases. At row 47, shelf E, the box labeled #96-221 sat silently under dim fluorescent light. He opened it, examining each item: the faded wool blanket, the moldy kitchen photo, the final report page noting person of interest, Jacob Ellery. Moore said nothing, only pulled out a copy of the file and clipped it neatly. "If technology ever catches up, I want to see the end," he quietly told the storage clerk. The vault door closed behind him, hallway lights dimming. Inside, hundreds of case boxes lay still, a thin layer of dust settling on unresolved mysteries. On Eleanor Price's box, a red italicized label stood out in the faint light: "Cold case, missing person, 1996. For nearly 2 decades after, no one spoke of her. In 2005, almost a decade after Eleanor Price vanished, the North Carolina Department of Justice established the Cold Case Unit to review unsolved cases with potential for reopening using new forensic technology. Among hundreds of files transferred from counties, case #96-221, the mysterious disappearance on Masonboro Loop Road, was marked eligible for review. Those involved in the initial investigation, including retired Lieutenant Kevin Moore, were invited to the first reassessment meeting at Wilmington headquarters. The dusty evidence box was retrieved, its faded label still bearing Moore's signature from 10 years prior. As technicians broke the seal, the smell of damp paper and old tape filled the air, evoking the heavy atmosphere of that house: cold tea, rain, and rotting wood. Inside, everything was neatly packed in yellowed plastic bags: the slipper, silver paint chip, soil samples, fabric scrap, and atop them, the blue wool blanket. Lieutenant Rachel Porter, the young officer leading the review team, read the old report and paused at the line: "Wool blanket. Primary evidence, not tested for DNA." She looked up and asked, "Why wasn't this tested?" A veteran technician replied, "Back then, DNA required large samples, and the blanket's preservation wasn't ideal for extraction. They didn't want to ruin the evidence, so they left it." Porter frowned, noting in her log, "Potential item for DNA extraction." On October 12, 2005, the Cold Case Unit Officially reopened case hash 96221. Moore, now 57, returned to the meeting room as a volunteer consultant. He walked slowly past the tables, looking at the old photos pinned to the board. The damp kitchen, the ajar back door, the wooden fence, the muddy spot where the slipper was found. All we had was a feeling someone took her, he said quietly. Porter nodded. Now we have something you didn't in 1996. DNA can speak for the missing. The technical team began inspecting all evidence, ensuring no degradation over time. The wool blanket was processed in a clean room, photographed fiber by fiber. Under a microscope, they found fine hair strands caught in the hem. Uncertain if they belonged to the victim or someone else. We'll reseal and send to Raleigh, Porter said. This could be our first break in 10 years. In 2006, North Carolina launched the DNA retesting project, allowing the cold case unit to send old samples to the State Bureau of Investigation Laboratory in Raleigh for PCR analysis, a technology capable of amplifying DNA from tiny samples. Porter promptly submitted a request with the blue wool blanket, evidence hash 7A. In April 2007, preliminary results returned. The DNA sample showed a weak response, insufficient for sequencing. The lab recommended preserving the sample for future technological advancements. Porter read the report silently, then filed it away. We can't risk damaging our only viable sample, she told the team. Keep it preserved and wait. In 2008, Moore received an email from Porter titled simply, Eleanor Price. She informed him the case remained active, though no new results had emerged. Moore replied, "Don't let it go back to storage. Every case has its moment. Keep it." He printed the email, clipped it to his personal case copy, and added a red ink note, reopened. DNA pending. In February 2010, the cold case unit conducted a new comprehensive review, checking the pending DNA results list. Porter noticed hash 96221 still lacked a final report. She contacted the Raleigh lab, learning the blanket sample had been properly preserved, ready for re-extraction with new technology. A formal request was sent to retest it in Q2 of that year. On June 14, 2010, the sample was analyzed using next-generation DNA systems, but results remained inconclusive. The sample was too old, the wool having absorbed moisture over years, fragmenting the DNA structure. The final report read, trace DNA detected, inconclusive. Porter set the report on her desk, sighing. She knew the case would fade again, at least for a few more years. But under new state regulations, case hash 96221 remained in the active cold cases category, not fully closed. And so, the evidence would be preserved longer, waiting for the day technology could reveal what a decade of silence couldn't. When Moore heard the news, he said only one thing in a meeting with Porter: don't let that blanket be forgotten. If it ever speaks, it'll tell everything. In March 2022, 12 years after the failed analysis, an email arrived from the North Carolina State Forensic Laboratory to the cold case unit, titled simply, Re-examination eligibility. Case hash 96221. The state's storage system had been upgraded to apply a new technique capable of extracting minute DNA from old evidence. Forensic genetic genealogy, a technology that had solved hundreds of cold cases across the U.S. Lieutenant Rachel Porter, now a senior supervisor, read the email with her heart racing. She immediately thought of the blue wool blanket, sealed for over 20 years, the evidence Moore once called the longest silent keeper in our file. 3 days later, Porter signed an order to transfer the evidence to the AAM Forensic Laboratory in Raleigh, partnered with the FBI's FGG initiative. The blanket, unsealed under sterile conditions, had a section the size of half a postage stamp cut for extraction. Under a microscope, experts saw what 20-year-old technology couldn't: male DNA structures mixed within the fibers. It's a mixed sample, the technician noted in the report. The female victim's DNA is weak, but the male sample is clear. Initial analysis via next-generation sequencing reconstructed a near-complete genome of 700,000 loci, enough to cross-reference with public genealogy databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. When results were uploaded, the software displayed multiple distant matches, third and fourth cousins, mostly bearing the surname Ellery, concentrated around Brunswick County, less than an hour's drive from Wilmington. Porter read the report, eyes fixed on the final line, strong genetic link to Ellery family, Brunswick County, North Carolina. In her mind, an old name resurfaced, Jacob Ellery, the carpenter who worked on the victim's house and was noted as a person of interest in 1996. She flipped through the original file copy, seeing Moore's signature and the red note, "Insufficient evidence, keep open." 26 years had passed, and now, that old wool blanket had spoken what no one expected to hear. A week later, an urgent meeting was held at the Cold Case Unit headquarters. The lab report was displayed on a large screen, showing an extended family tree, with genetic branches converging on the Ellery lineage. No direct codes match since this person was never arrested, the DNA expert explained. But the genealogical link is strong enough to guide the investigation. Porter looked around the table at the young officers taking notes. "So we're back to 1996's starting point," she said. "Only this time, we have scientific evidence." The next day she called Kevin Moore, now 74, living in suburban Asheville. "Mr. Moore, this is Porter, Cold Case Unit. I think you'll want to hear this." On the other end, his raspy voice went silent for a moment before saying, "The blanket, right?" "Yes. Male DNA matches the Ellery lineage in Brunswick County." A brief pause, then he replied, "So she's finally speaking." In April 2022, the Cold Case Unit officially reopened case hash 96221, newly coded Operation Masonboro. Moore was invited back as an honorary investigation consultant, tasked with reconstructing the original context and witnesses. He sat in the meeting room, looking at the blanket's photo on the large screen. "I told them not to toss it," he said, a tired smile creasing his wrinkled face. It was the only thing that could speak for her. Porter and the new investigation team began reviewing Brunswick County resident data to identify living Ellery family members. Jacob Ellery, the once suspected man, now 69, still lived in Southport, a small coastal town 45 miles from Wilmington. DMV records showed he still owned the 1988 silver Ford F-150, the same type described by witnesses in 1996. Tax records indicated he worked independently as a home repairman, living alone in a wooden house by a pine forest. "Too close for coincidence," Porter remarked. She submitted a report to the Cold Case Unit director, requesting covert surveillance. A small team of 3 officers was assigned to monitor Ellery's daily activities, routes, contacts, bank transactions, and especially household trash, a potential source for indirect DNA. Moore joined Porter at the old scene one May morning. Masonboro Loop Road was now paved, the land around Eleanor's house replaced by a new residential area. The original house was gone, leaving only a bare concrete foundation and old oak trees. Moore stood silently, holding the 1996 map, his voice low. "What's gone is never fully gone. It just waits for the right person to listen." 3 months later, a supplemental lab report confirmed the blanket's DNA matched the Ellery lineage with a 1- in -7.8 billion probability, essentially an individual confirmation. The formal investigation was launched. Once again, Wilmington's name appeared on the active case list after over 26 years of silence. And this time, the focus was back on the man who had always denied everything, Jacob Ellery. Moore received the first fax bearing the Cold Case Unit logo, titled "Reactivated. Case hash 96221. He placed it on his desk, staring at the bold text, "Evidence reopened under FGG analysis. Consultant assigned, Moore, Kevin." The breeze outside stirred softly, and in that moment, He knew the investigation he thought was closed for a lifetime was only now truly beginning. In June 2022, 4 weeks after the lab confirmed the DNA matched the Ellery lineage, the cold case unit began covert surveillance of the man once the prime suspect in the 1996 disappearance. Jacob Ellery, 69, now lived in Southport, Brunswick County, about 70 kilometers from Wilmington. Resident records showed he owned a small wooden house at the end of Caswell Avenue, less than half a mile from the coast. Neighbors described him as quiet, punctual, and barely social. Lieutenant Rachel Porter formed Surveillance Team 03, comprising 3 experienced investigators, including Detective Ron Harris, who had worked on federal tracking cases. The directive was clear: no contact, no confrontation. Everything must be collected legally and discreetly. Moore, as a consultant, participated remotely, reviewing daily reports via the internal system. He often read in silence, marking key details in red ink and sending back brief notes. On June 14, the team began observing Ellery. In the morning, he left home at 7:10, driving the 1988 silver Ford F-150, the same truck from the old file, to a building supply store. The truck's bed was splotched with paint, the rear tarp showing faint silverware, matching the 1996 witness description. He bought lumber and nails, leaving after about half an hour. The entire trip was recorded by a camera on the surveillance vehicle. Moves slowly, cautiously. No signs of alertness, Harris reported over the radio. In the afternoon, Ellery walked along the beach, collecting shells. Each day added to the surveillance log: departure times, routes, stops, contacts. He rarely spoke to anyone except a grocery clerk and a mail carrier. On rainy evenings, his house lights stayed on late. The second-floor window occasionally cracked open, a faint yellow glow spilling into the narrow alley where the F-150 sat, like a ghost from the past. Porter knew they needed direct biological evidence, not just a genealogical link, but an exact DNA match to the blanket. Per protocol, investigators had to collect discarded DNA, samples left in public, not violating privacy. On June 21, Harris followed the neighborhood trash truck. When workers collected Ellery's garbage, he marked a bag containing beer cans, a plastic straw, and tissues. As the truck left the residential area, Harris and his partner secured a temporary seizure order for the bag per regulations. The items were sent directly to the Raleigh Forensic Laboratory, sealed under code FGG 221B. 7 days later, the results arrived at the cold case unit. The 10-page report ended with 2 bolded lines: DNA profile complete. Match probability 99.98%, with male DNA extracted from Exhibit 7A. Porter read it twice, her palms sweating. She looked up at Moore, standing by the office window, sunlight reflecting off his face. "We've got him," she said softly. Moore replied simply, "Yes, and now we do it right." On July 3, the cold case unit met with the new Hanover County Prosecutor's Office. The DNA evidence, genealogical tracing, 1996 witness statements, and the suspect vehicle report were fully presented. The director signed an emergency arrest warrant request, citing charges of second-degree murder and kidnapping. While the legal team finalized the paperwork, Porter intensified surveillance on Ellery. On July 5, he drove to St. Peter's Church in downtown Southport, where he attended every Sunday. Cameras captured him briefly speaking with the pastor, his face calm, movements gentle. No one would suspect the silver-haired man, with a slow gait, was linked to the disappearance of an 81-year-old woman nearly 3 decades ago. But Moore knew the calmest faces often hid unimaginable truths. By July 8, all procedures were ready. Porter signed the formal arrest warrant request and faxed it to the district judge. At 5:26 p.m., the new Hanover County Court approved it, noting, "Subject Jacob Allen Ellery, age 69. Charge kidnapping, second-degree murder." Simultaneously, an arrest team was dispatched from Wilmington, coordinating with local police. Moore received Porter's final call before she departed. "I want you there when we bring him in," she said, her voice restrained but tense. He replied briefly, "I'll be there." It wasn't just a promise, but the culmination of 15 years he'd never truly left behind. That evening, Southport was still. Yellow streetlights glowed on rain-wet roads, droplets falling steadily from eaves onto cold concrete. In the command vehicle, Porter reviewed the warrant once more. The paper was still warm from the printer, bold text stating, "Based on DNA evidence linking suspect to 1996 disappearance of Eleanor Price." She took a deep breath, folded the warrant, and looked through the window at the sea fog blanketing the quiet streets. At 6:30 a.m. the next morning, 3 Wilmington police patrol cars, joined by Brunswick County's task force, quietly entered the narrow road, headlights off, guided only by dawn's faint light through misty pines. The signed warrant from the previous night was in Lieutenant Rachel Porter's hands, who led the scene. In the vehicle, she studied a 1996 photo of Jacob Ellery, comparing it to his latest DMV image. Silver hair, wrinkled face, but the same cold, hollow eyes from the day his name first appeared in case hash 96221. Inside the wooden house, Ellery was brewing coffee. The wall clock read 6:47. He turned on the radio, soft country music playing. Before he could carry his mug to the porch, a heavy knock resounded 3 times, firm and deliberate. North Carolina State Police, Jacob Ellery, opened the door. Porter's voice rang clear through the megaphone. After a moment's silence, the curtain twitched. The door cracked open, Ellery appearing in a gray sweater, his gaze steady. "What's this about, officer?" "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection to the 1996 disappearance of Eleanor Price," Porter stated, holding up the red-stamped warrant. He didn't react, only furrowed his brow slightly. "I told you people about that almost 30 years ago." 2 officers stepped forward, cuffing his hands behind his back. As the metal clicked, Porter read his Miranda rights clearly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Ellery nodded, his eyes closing briefly before meeting Porter's. "You don't know what you're chasing." The words made her pause for half a second before signaling the search team. The small house had 2 rooms, a living area and a woodshop connected to the kitchen. The air smelled of sawdust mixed with fresh coffee, yellow light filtering through dusty curtains. The forensic team began filming every corner, marking evidence with plastic tags. On the wooden workbench, they found an old leather-bound notebook, its first page reading, "Price, October 7, 1996. Below were brief notes, seemingly a materials list: boards, nails, oil, rope. A technician gloved up and flipped further. Mid-notebook, a scribbled pencil entry: "She came early. Talked too much. I said I'd help." The item was sealed, labeled Evidence #032-2023A. Porter stood silently, staring at e-bars, her fist clenching. "Send it for handwriting analysis as soon as the search is done," she ordered. In a desk drawer by the window, they found an old 1995 Wilmington topographic map, folded and worn at the edges. A red circle marked Carolina Beach State Park, about 30 miles from the victim's home. Next to it, scrawled words: "Water's Edge." Porter conferred briefly with Detective Harris. This area was searched in 1996, but never deeply excavated. Noted, will request a search warrant. In the bedroom, under the bed, technicians found an old Western Digital hard drive with an IDE cable, typical of late 90s computers, stored in a small wooden box wrapped in newspaper. It was immediately sealed, labeled Evidence #032-2023C, and sent to the Cybercrime Unit for data recovery. That afternoon, the digital team recovered deleted text files. In a folder named Letters, they found an unsent email draft with 4 words: "She trusted me, completely." No recipient, no date. But the file was created on October 12, 1996, 4 days after Eleanor Price vanished. Reading those words, Porter felt a chill down her spine. She printed a copy for Moore, who had just arrived from Wilmington. He sat in the narrow room's wooden chair, eyes fixed on the paper. "This isn't a confession, but a reminder to himself," he said softly. "And people only write things like that when they know something's over." By evening, after 8 hours of searching, the evidence list totaled 23 items. The notebook, map, hard drive, cell phone, car paint samples, and various personal items. All were sealed, cataloged on-site, and signed by Porter and the district prosecutor. Moore, signing as a witness, paused briefly at his signature line. The red ink trembled slightly before marking "witnessed by Moore, Kevin." At 6:10 p.m., Jacob Ellery was escorted from the house. Neighbors watched silently from a distance, none speaking. He didn't resist, only asking as he crossed the porch, "How many years did it take you to find me again?" Porter replied, 26 years. "And now it's time you tell us the rest of the story." The police convoy left Caswell Avenue in the fading sunset. Ellery's reflection in the car window showed a calm face, unafraid, as if he'd long awaited this moment. The vehicles moved along the highway toward Wilmington, red and blue lights flashing against low clouds. At 8:32 p.m., the convoy stopped at the New Hanover County Detention Center. The door opened. Ellery stepped out, his shackled feet clinking lightly on the concrete. Porter followed, holding the thick file, copies of the arrest warrant, evidence log, and the circled map of Carolina Beach. As the metal door closed behind them, a duty officer logged, "Subject, Jacob Allen Ellery. Intake time, 2041. Charge, murder kidnapping." Outside, a light drizzle began, tapping steadily on patrol car roofs. In the cold case unit office, Moore received the day's final report call. Porter's voice came through clearly. "Suspect in custody. All evidence secure. Search warrant for Carolina Beach State Park in preparation." Moore nodded slightly, his gaze heavy. "Good. Now let's see what he buried under that sand for 26 years. 3 days after Jacob Ellery's arrest, the investigation entered its most critical phase, reconstructing the events of the 1996 disappearance night. The goal: determine if Ellery drove Eleanor Price from Masonboro Loop Road to Carolina Beach State Park, where his map marked Water's Edge. Lieutenant Rachel Porter convened a meeting at the Cold Case Unit, third-floor conference room of the Wilmington Police Department. A large New Hanover County map, overlaid with 1996 roads and bridges, hung on the wall. Kevin Moore sat at the table's head, joined by 2 criminal geographers and an FBI data analyst. Porter pointed to a screen displaying a digitized reconstruction of the paper map from Ellery's house. "This is a 1995 U.S. Geological Survey map," she said. "The circled area matches the marshy western part of the park, rarely visited and flooded for over 20 years. They began reconstructing a plausible timeline for October 8, 1996, using weather reports, phone data, and old witness statements. Archives showed light rain from 4:45 a.m. until around 7 o'clock. A neighbor heard a truck engine at 6:15, and witness Arthur Nolan reported seeing a silver truck leave Masonboro Loop at 6:30. Simultaneously, Eleanor's home phone signal cut off at 6:17, confirmed by Southern Bell's system log, matching the stopped kitchen clock to the minute. The distance from Masonboro Loop to Carolina Beach State Park via 1996 routes is a 27-minute drive, the analyst said, pointing to the projected map. If the truck left at 6:30, it could reach the western marsh by 6:57, when heavier rain began. Rain would erase tire tracks within 10 minutes. Porter stared silently at the red line connecting the 2 points, a stark path across 2 decades. A supplemental forensic report from Raleigh's lab that day strengthened the theory. Soil from Eleanor's backdoor mat, sealed since 1996, was compared to coastal forest samples from a preliminary survey. Under a microscope, experts found identical quartz and clay minerals, characteristic of Carolina Beach, fine grains, sea salt, and organic marsh debris. The geological match was 98.4%, too high for coincidence. That means, Moore said, eyes fixed on the analysis. Someone walked from that forest into her house, or vice versa. And if it's the latter, we know who drove. Meanwhile, the fixed-line phone analysis team recovered an old log from archived switchboard data, a feat, as most such records were erased. They found an incomplete call from Eleanor's home to Ellery's line at 6:11 a.m., lasting under 3 seconds. She might have called before being taken, Porter said quietly. Or he was already in the house, and the call was cut off. From all data, the cold case unit built a 3D model simulating the likely route. A Ford F-150 leaving Masonboro Loop, traveling Pine Grove Road, crossing the old Snows-Cut Bridge, and entering the western forest of Carolina Beach State Park. This route barely changed in 25 years, but back then, it was sparsely traveled, with no traffic cameras. Using terrain models and rain data, they pinpointed the ideal stop, where tire tracks would leave no trace and sound was muffled by water. If he wanted to vanish with her, that's the spot, Moore concluded. That noon, Porter presented a 7-page petition to the district prosecutor's office, writing, based on geological analysis, weather data, and physical evidence, the cold case unit proposes a supervised forensic excavation at the circled area on the map, seized from suspect Jacob Ellery's residence. The location is at coordinates 34.032N, 77.9. 11W, in the park's waterfront forest, currently undeveloped. The prosecutor read it and said, "Only this is the first time we have a specific path." The area search warrant was approved that day, coordinated by the Wilmington Police, State Forensics, and the Environmental Crime Unit for excavation in a protected area. That evening, in the empty office, Porter spread the map on the table. Yellow light illuminated the faded ink, blurred at the folds. Beside her, Moore flipped through old witness logs, his voice low. "I stood here in 1996. The water was too high to search then. Now the sea's receded, the ground's dry, and what we're looking for is under that sand." Porter didn't reply, only nodded. She signed the deployment order, stamping it February 12, 2023. "Below site excavation approved under forensic supervision," she added in blue ink. Case #96221, Phase 2 recovery. Outside, the rain had stopped. On the highway to Carolina Beach, ocean winds blew inland, carrying a salty chill. 26 years ago, a man drove an old truck down this road into the dark. Now, a forensic convoy was set to retrace it, not to hide, but to uncover what was buried. On the morning of February 15, 2023, the sky over Carolina Beach State Park was overcast, sea mist blanketing the pine forest along the marsh. North Carolina State Forensics vehicles parked along a trail leading to coordinates 34.032, N, 77.9, 11W, the exact spot circled in red on Ellery's map. Beside them were criminal technicians, geologists, and cold case unit investigators, all in white protective suits, masks, and gloves, moving carefully through wet sand and tangled roots. Lieutenant Rachel Porter pointed to the low-lying area marked with yellow cord. "Start at Point A," she ordered. 2 technicians staked the area, setting up a field tent to shield it from sea winds. Kevin Moore, now in his 70s, stood silently at the forest's edge, watching every move. He'd stood in this exact spot in 1996, when high marsh water forced the search to stop. "This time," he said quietly, "we're not leaving until we know the truth." At 9 a.m., ground-penetrating radar began, emitting steady beeps. Scans displayed on a technician's laptop, mostly wet sand and roots, but at 34.0325, in, 77.9, 112, the radar showed an anomaly, an oval shape, 70 centimeters deep, about 1.6 meters long. Porter stepped forward, signaling to cordon it off. "Excavate this first." The forensic team began digging the top sand layer with small shovels and soft brushes. The sand here was unusual, drier, looser, as if disturbed and recovered. After nearly 20 minutes, A technician whispered, "I've got something." He brushed away fine soil, revealing a glint, a silver ring, tarnished, but clearly engraved with EP. Everyone froze, silent. Porter, double-gloved, lifted the ring with steel tweezers, placing it in an evidence tray. No confirmation was needed. All knew they'd found Eleanor Price's first trace in 26 years. Digging 15 centimeters deeper, the soil darkened to a rich brown. A small, brittle bone appeared, caked in salty mud. The forensic technician whispered, "Confirmed human bone." The site was immediately sealed tightly. They widened the dig, uncovering an arm bone, pelvis, and a slightly cracked skull, all in a side-lying position, head facing the marsh. As if hastily placed and covered. Near the shoulder, a tattered blue fabric scrap was found, its fiber structure matching the 1996 wool blanket from the victim's home. Porter stepped back, silent, looking at Moore. He stood there, eyes glistening in the midday light, both relieved and burdened. "I always thought she was near water," he said softly. "And now she is." By early afternoon, all remaining bones were excavated and arranged in their original position for forensic photography. Each piece was numbered, with orientation and depth recorded. Soil around the bones was sampled for mineral and burial time analysis. A small, rotted wooden box, hand-sized, was found near the feet, containing decayed papers. Nearly illegible, but technicians noted, black ink traces, possibly a handwritten letter. As the sun dipped, the smell of salt and sand filled the air, and the forensic team completed collection. The remains, or rather the victim's skeleton, were placed in a preservation bag, labeled Evidence #032-2023D. Sealed under the prosecutor's witness. Porter signed the chain of custody log, her hand trembling slightly. Moore placed a hand on her shoulder. "You just brought someone home after 26 years. The next day, at the University of North Carolina's forensic lab in Chapel Hill, experts began identity confirmation. Initial analysis identified the remains as female, aged 80, course 5 years, height 1.57 meters, fully matching Eleanor Price's description. DNA from the sternum and teeth, compared to Lauren Ellis's family database sample, returned 99.99% probability. Match with Eleanor Price. The news reached the cold case unit on the afternoon of February 18th. Porter opened the email in a silent room, Moore beside her, saying nothing as she read the final line. Identity confirmed. Case upgraded to homicide investigation. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Moore said, "It's not a missing person case anymore." The official forensic report, sent to the Wilmington Police Department 2 days later, was brief and stark. Cause of death: undetermined. Manner of death: homicide, consistent with body concealment post-mortem. That line closed a nearly 3-decade search, but opened the final chapter of a case once deemed unsolvable. In the office, Porter pinned a photo of the scene, the silver EP ring in a gloved palm, to the caseboard. Below it, she wrote in red, "Recovered, February 15th, 2023. Truth found where silence began." Outside the window, Wilmington saw light rain, each drop falling steadily, like the ticking of that old clock stopped at 6:17 a.m. The moment Eleanor Price left the world, leaving a mystery that patience and science had finally answered. On February 14th, 2023, as Wilmington saw scattered rain, 2 men sat across from each other in the second-floor interrogation room of the new Hanover County Detention Center. Jacob Ellery, 69, silver hair cropped short, in an orange jumpsuit, and Kevin Moore, retired investigator invited back as a consultant. Beside Moore was FBI agent Samuel Price, assigned, due to the case's escalation to a federal homicide involving cross-county elements. A ceiling camera blinked red, the recorder humming steadily. No one spoke for nearly a minute, only the rain tapping lightly on the window. Moore began, his voice low and raspy. "Jacob, It's been 26 years. We're not here on suspicion. We have answers now. We just want your part of the story. Ellery leaned back, hands clasped, eyes cold. My part? He gave a faint smile. I helped her leave that place. Nothing more, nothing less. Moore leaned forward. Leave where? Masonboro Loop or Wilmington? Ellery didn't answer immediately, only stared at the metal table. She wasn't happy there. Alone, forgotten. I gave her another way out. Agent Price opened a file, sliding it toward him. Inside were excavation photos, the silver EP ring, the blue wool scrap, and the map from Ellery's house. He said, "Is this the other way out, you mean?" Ellery glanced briefly, then turned away. "You don't understand," he said quietly. Still calm, she wanted peace. Moore shifted to the Reed method, a three-stage psychological interrogation: approach, confrontation, and breaking defenses. He placed the file back on the table, his voice soft, conversational. "Jacob, I know you didn't mean to hurt her. Maybe it was an accident, a moment of panic. You helped fix her kitchen, right?" "Yes. And on the morning of October 8th, you were there." "No, I wasn't." Moore opened a tablet, displaying the 1996 route radar reconstruction and archived city traffic camera images. "You left your house at 6:12 a.m. Your truck crossed Snow's Cut Bridge at 6:37. You know we have toll booth records? Only 14 vehicles passed that bridge in that time frame, and one was a silver Ford F-150, plate 6C-247. Ellery's lips twitched, trying to keep his voice steady. "I had that truck, but I sold it in 1998. "No," Price interjected. "You deregistered the license plate on October 11, 1996, 3 days after Eleanor disappeared. Oddly, the deregistration form has the same handwriting as your notebook, the entry reading, E. Price, October 7th. Still want to say you know nothing about it?" For the first time, Ellery's eyes flickered. He swallowed hard, staring into the space between them. "You've got a lot of things, but you don't have the most important one. Proof I killed anyone." Moore tilted his head, his voice even. "No, we have something else. We have the truth about where she ended up, and every trace leads straight to you. We don't need you to say you killed her. We just need you to say why she had to die." Ellery's hands clenched on the table, his shoulders tensing. He sighed, eyes closing for a few seconds. "I don't remember," he said softly. "Don't remember," Moore repeated. "The map, the things you found. I don't know who put them there. I don't remember drawing anything." Moore flipped to the photo of the map with the red ink mark. "This is your handwriting, matched 100% to the pencil strokes in your notebook by the lab. You circled Water's Edge. You know where that is. You went there with her, Jacob." This time, Ellery looked up, meeting Moore's gaze. His tired eyes held a glint of defiance. "If you're right, why did it take you 26 years to find me?" Moore stared at him for a long moment, then replied softly, "Because it took science 26 years to catch up to your crime." The room's air grew thick. The wall clock ticked dryly. Price scribbled in his notebook, then looked straight at Ellery. "I'll ask one last time. Care to explain why Eleanor's blanket has your DNA?" Ellery stayed silent, his gaze drifting to the curtained window. Outside, the rain grew heavier, pelting the tin roof. After nearly a minute, he turned back, his voice hoarse. "I want a lawyer." Moore sat up, turning off the recorder. "Interrogation concluded at 15:42, he said aloud. Ellery was led out by 2 officers, walking slowly but with his back straight. As the metal door closed, Moore remained seated, eyes fixed on the silver ring photo in the file. He knew the truth was at the threshold, but the only person who could open that door had just chosen silence. On February 19, 2023, 5 days after the first interrogation, Jacob Ellery was brought back to Investigation Room 4 at the New Hanover County Detention Center. Wilmington's air was damp, a fine mist falling. In the room, Lieutenant Rachel Porter and Agent Samuel Price waited. Kevin Moore sat in the corner, silent as an observer. The air was thick with the smell of cold coffee and metal. On the table, They arranged the key evidence, the DNA sample, the circled map, the leather-bound notebook, and the blue wool blanket scrap, all sealed and labeled. Each item lay like a piece of exposed memory. Porter began, "We'll be recording this entire process. Do you agree to answer questions?" Ellery nodded slightly, his voice raspy. "I spoke to my lawyer. He said I shouldn't, but I don't like staying silent forever." His response halted the room for a few seconds. Moore glanced at Porter, signaling her to proceed. Porter pulled the thick file forward. "Jacob, I want you to look at these. The DNA on the blanket matches your hairbrush sample at 99.98%. The soil on Eleanor's doormat perfectly matches the forest strata where her remains were found. Your notebook clearly states a Price, October 7th, 1996. And this," she gently placed the map down, "is the map you marked Water's Edge. All of these, no one but you could have left." Ellery didn't look up. He propped his elbows on the table, hands clenching. "You've torn through my whole life," he said slowly. "But you don't understand what happened between me and her." Moore leaned forward. "Then tell us." Ellery looked up, his eyes deep and murky like winter water. "Eleanor was the only one in the neighborhood who talked to me," he began. "I fixed her window in July 1996. Everyone saw me as a gruff handyman. But he paused, lips trembling slightly. "She brought out tea. Talked to me like a decent person." Porter scribbled each word. "And then what?" "Then she started talking about her fear of being forgotten. I just listened." His voice faded. "I thought I could help." Moore cut in, his tone soft but sharp. "Help by taking her out of Wilmington?" Ellery fell silent for a long time. The rain tapped steadily on the tin roof. "I didn't kill her," he said. "I just took her away." "Took her where?" Porter asked. "To the water's edge. She said she wanted peace there. She said the sea made her feel calm. I didn't think it would end like that." Porter opened the excavation photos, sliding them toward him. "Want to talk about this?" He glanced at the silver ring engraved with EP, eyes briefly closing. "I remember that ring. She took it off, told me to hold it, afraid it'd fall in the water." He paused, voice hoarse. "I put it in my pocket. Then the rain came. She slipped." "Slipped where, Jacob?" Porter asked quickly, her voice calm, but pressing. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "At the forest edge, where the water's still. I pulled her up, but it was too late. I panicked. I thought if I called the police, they'd say I killed her. I just laid her down, then left." The room filled with the sound of flipping pages, scratching pens. Moore looked straight at him, his gaze both cold and weary. "You say she slipped, but when we found her, her ribs were broken, her skull cracked. That's not from a light fall. Care to explain further?" Ellery's hands tightened, his face twitched, then he spoke softly, almost a whisper. "She panicked. She said she'd tell others that I forced her to go. I lost control. I just held her shoulders tight." "Held tight?" Moore asked. "Yes, just for a moment. Then she stopped breathing." The room went silent. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Porter noted the final line, partial confession. Admitted physical restraint, leading to death. Agent Price closed the file. "Do you realize what you just said, Jacob? You've admitted to actions directly causing her death." Ellery didn't respond, staring at his calloused hands. "She trusted me more than anyone," he said softly, almost to himself. "If I hadn't been there, maybe she'd still be alive. I just wanted to help." Moore looked at him for a long time, then said gently, "Helping never means burying." At 5:28 p.m., the interrogation ended. As the recorder stopped, Porter read the log. Subject provided partial admission of involvement, acknowledging restraint, resulting in victim's death, and concealment of body. Statements recorded and verified. That evening, the new Hanover County Prosecutor's Office received the full report. After reviewing the evidence, statements, and DNA results, Chief Prosecutor David Lennox signed an internal memo. Based on Section 1417, North Carolina Criminal Code, sufficient grounds exist to charge Jacob Allen Ellery with first-degree murder. The news reached the cold case unit at 8:46 p.m. In the office, Porter read the memo silently, the screen's light reflecting on her tired face. Moore sat back, eyes on the old map, still pinned to the wall, where the red ink, water's edge, had become a witness to an indirect confession. Brief, distorted, but enough to close 3 decades of lies. A week after Jacob Ellery's partial confession, case hash 96-221, State of North Carolina versus Jacob Allen Ellery, was sent to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, Virginia. Their task: reconstruct the suspect's psychological profile to determine the motive and pattern of control exhibited before and after Eleanor Price's disappearance. In a small Wilmington meeting room, Lieutenant Rachel Porter and consultant Kevin Moore attended a video briefing. On the screen, Dr. Marcia Holloway, a BOEO criminal psychologist, began calmly. We analyzed Ellery's personal history journals and financial behavior from 1995 to 2000. The results suggest this wasn't a spontaneous accident as he claims, but a deliberate pattern of control and manipulation. The analysis showed Ellery began targeting isolated elderly individuals, particularly women living alone, in the mid-1990s. As a freelance carpenter, he took jobs repairing homes for older residents in Masonboro Loop in Southport. Police records noted at least 3 complaints about handyman Jacob keeping clients' keys longer than necessary or returning uninvited. Lacking specific property damage, these incidents were not prosecuted. Dr. Holloway pointed to a behavior chart on the screen. Approach phase: Ellery displayed thoughtfulness, reliability, often helping with small tasks or giving minor gifts. Control phase: establishing emotional dependency, making victims trust him completely. Exploitation phase: leveraging access to finances, personal information, or property. Elimination phase: when victims posed a threat of exposure or resisted, he severed contact, in Eleanor's case, through violence. Porter reviewed financial records from Cape Fear Federal Bank. 2 months after Eleanor Price's disappearance, her Social Security pension account was regularly withdrawn 23 times from 1997, 1998, $620 each time. Transactions used a secondary ATM card issued in 1997 under authorized representative named Jacob A. Ellery. That account was never reported missing, Porter said. The bank believed Eleanor was still alive. They received faxed confirmation from a landline number, which we now confirm was Ellery's. Moore finished. The FBI also analyzed the suspect's notebook. Entries showed how Ellery justified controlling others. If they don't know what's good for them, I'll make them understand. Sometimes, to keep someone safe, you have to make them silent. Dr. Holloway concluded, this reflects the mindset of a controlling individual with a latent personality disorder, a rescue complex, believing they have the right to decide for others to protect them. When that dependency is threatened, they react with extreme measures to maintain power. Moore sat silently, then said, and when she wanted to end that dependency, he saw it as betrayal. The BO's analysis extended beyond psychology. They compared Ellery's behavior to financial crime patterns from the period. A trend emerged after each elderly client moved away or died. Ellery paid off small debts and purchased expensive equipment. In 1997, he bought a new truck and paid installments on a Southport workshop, coinciding with withdrawals from Eleanor's account. The financial motive is clear, Price concluded. He didn't just control her emotionally, but financially. When he feared exposure, he chose the most final way to bury both her and the evidence. The BO's official report to Wilmington stated, behavioral assessment: subject exhibits traits of predatory control, narcissistic justification, and post-offense rationalization. Motive consistent with financial exploitation and concealment through homicide. Porter printed the summary, clipping it to the main file. She read the report's final line, feeling a chill. To Jacob Ellery, Eleanor Price wasn't a victim. She was an asset that stopped yielding. Moore sat quietly, looking out the window where rain fell steadily. 26 years ago, he thought this was a hopeless missing person case. Now, the truth didn't bring relief, only a heavier weight. In the end, he said softly, it all comes back to trust, money and loneliness. What killed her, not just his hands. On March 2, 2023, the new Hanover County Courthouse was lit early. In a dark wooden room on the second floor, a grand jury of 12 sat around a table, facing a nearly 2,000-page file labeled in red. State of North Carolina versus Jacob Allen Ellery, case #96-221. Chief Prosecutor David Lennox opened the hearing calmly. Ladies and gentlemen, this case was reopened after 26 years. All physical, chemical, and financial evidence was preserved per the chain of custody and verified by independent testing. We present the full file for formal indictment of the defendant, Jacob Ellery. On a projector, he listed 3 charges: kidnapping an elderly person, second-degree murder with aggravating financial crime concealment, financial fraud and theft through a deceased person's identity. With a firm voice, Lennox outlined the evidence, from physical to digital, as a culmination of 3 decades of investigation. 1. Physical evidence: blue wool blanket, seized in 1996, resealed, and DNA tested in 2022. Silver ring engraved, EP, excavated February 15, 2023, with tissue and sea salt matching forest soil. 1995 topographic map, circling water's edge, bearing Ellery's fingerprints and handwriting. Western digital hard drive containing the draft letter, "She trusted me," recovered by the cybercrime unit. 2. Financial evidence. Cape Fear Federal Bank statements from 1997. 1998, withdrawals via Ellery's secondary card as authorized representative. Tax and transaction anomalies. 1997, Ford F-150 truck purchased in cash, post-initial pension withdrawals. Forensic evidence, DNA comparison between blanket, Ellery's hairbrush and victim's bones, 99.98% match. Soil from victim's doormat, 98.4% match with excavation site strata. Forensic anthropology report, identifying remains as Eleanor Price, 81, death by external force, consistent with October 8, 1996. Lennox continued with the critical chain of custody, ensuring all evidence was legally admissible. He listed each officer responsible over 27 years. 1996. Sergeant Kevin Moore, Wilmington PD, collected and sealed evidence at the original scene. 1998. Evidence clerk Sharon Lee, transferred to New Hanover County Storage. 2010. Forensic Lab Raleigh, unsealed for preliminary DNA sampling. 2022. State Forensic Genetics Division, FGG analysis. 2023. North Carolina Medical Examiner's Office, victim identification. All transfer records included signatures, storage codes, and independent verification logs. As he displayed the chain of signatures on the screen, each mark testified to the investigation's continuity and transparency. Near the end, Lennox concluded, no evidence was lost, contaminated, or fabricated by third parties. All data points to one person, Jacob Allen Ellery. After over 2 hours, the grand jury retired to deliberate. 14 minutes later, the foreperson stood. The New Hanover County Grand Jury formally approves the criminal indictment of defendant Jacob Allen Ellery on all 3 charges as presented. The courtroom fell silent. Porter exhaled, her hand gripping her pen. Moore sat in the back, eyes on Eleanor Price's photo on the screen, her gentle face, faint smile, the woman he'd promised her granddaughter he'd never forget. The next day, the case file was transferred to the North Carolina Superior Court, Wilmington Division, under Judge Janet Holloway. Evidence was transported in a secure vehicle with police escort, accompanied by Lennox's stamped chain of custody log. In the transfer memo, Porter wrote a single line by hand at the end. All that remains of Eleanor Price now belongs to justice. As the convoy left the courthouse lot, Moore stood by the roadside, watching the sky's reflection in the vehicle's glass, misty over Wilmington. 26 years after that fateful morning, the missing person case had closed, replaced by a new chapter, one of court, evidence, and justice no longer cold. On May 22, 2023, nearly 3 months after the grand jury's indictment, the North Carolina Superior Court, Wilmington Division, opened a pretrial hearing for State of North Carolina visit Jacob Allen Ellery. Courtroom 3 was packed, with local press and state TV channels present. On the defendant's bench, Jacob Ellery, 69, wore a gray shirt and khakis, hands lightly cuffed, his face calm to the point of coldness. To his right was court-appointed defense attorney Alan Weathers, a seasoned former prosecutor now in private practice. To his left, Chief Prosecutor David Lennox with the state's legal team. In the back row, Lieutenant Rachel Porter and Kevin Moore sat quietly, the final witnesses to a long journey. Judge Janet Holloway opened with a solemn tone. Today's hearing determines the admissibility of evidence, particularly the genetic analysis via forensic genetic genealogy and items collected after the case's 2022 reopening. Prosecutor Lennox stood, holding a thick file, stepping to the courtroom center. Your Honor, the DNA evidence was analyzed under strict chain of custody protocols. The 1,996 sealed blanket was genetically sequenced at the State Forensic Genetics Division, then cross-referenced via the open-source GED match database to identify familial links. The FGG method has been deemed admissible in Massachusetts, Virginia, and California criminal courts. We submit accompanying technical certifications, expert testimonies, and independent lab reports. Defense Attorney Weathers stood to object. Your Honor, I object to the use of civilian genetic data. My client never consented to his relative's DNA being used in a criminal investigation. This method violates Fourth Amendment privacy rights. The courtroom buzzed softly. Judge Holloway struck her gavel. Order. She turned to the prosecution. Mr. Lennox, your response? Lennox replied calmly. Your Honor, the data used was fully public. Individuals uploading to GED Match agreed to terms, allowing criminal investigation access. Furthermore, the match only guided the investigation. The final confirming DNA was collected directly from the defendant via court order. We have forensic certification of a 99.98% match. The judge skimmed precedent cases. After a brief silence, she ruled, the court finds no procedural violation. The FGG method is admissible in criminal prosecution, provided data comes from voluntary sources and is verified by supplemental DNA. The defense's objection is overruled. Weathers nodded slightly, offering no further argument. Next, the prosecution presented the evidence display. A large glass table was wheeled to the courtroom center, holding 4 key items in sealed containers. The blue wool blanket, the first item with Ellery's DNA, preserved since 1996. The 1995 topographic map, circling water's edge, bearing the defendant's fingerprints and handwriting. The leather-bound notebook, noting E. Price, October 7, 1996, with the entry, she came early, talked too much. Cape Fear Federal Bank statements, showing 1997, 1998 pension withdrawals, with Ellery's forged signature. Each item's collection, sealing, transfer, and independent verification was detailed by a forensic technician. Every chain of custody signatory was listed. The court listened for nearly 2 hours, no one leaving their seat. At the close, Weathers noted his objection. My client denies intentional murder. He maintains Eleanor Price's death was accidental. Judge Holloway looked at him, then to the prosecution. The court has reviewed the evidence procedure. There is no indication of fabrication or custody violation. All items are deemed admissible for the formal trial. She paused briefly, then read clearly. The trial date for State v. Ellery is set for August 17, 2023, in Courtroom 2, North Carolina Superior Court, Wilmington Division. The gavel struck. The courtroom fell completely silent, save for the relentless clicking of cameras. Porter exhaled slowly, while Moore quietly stared at the yellowed notebook behind the glass. A small piece of evidence, carrying a lifetime of deceit. As Ellery was led away by officers, he glanced back briefly, his eyes showing no remorse, only the weariness of someone who'd waited too long for the inevitable. Porter watched, feeling as if the final pages of the case file were writing themselves, 26 years of absence, now stepping into the light of justice. On August 17, 2023, the North Carolina Superior Court, Wilmington Division, opened the formal trial of State of North Carolina v. Jacob Allen Ellery, marking the final step of an investigation spanning over 2 decades. The large courtroom was equipped with 3 cameras, the public gallery packed with reporters, law students, and locals who'd followed the 26-year missing woman case. In the front row, Lauren Ellis, Eleanor Price's granddaughter, sat clutching the blue wool blanket returned after forensic analysis, now a keepsake, no longer evidence. Defendant Jacob Ellery, 69, appeared in a black suit, his face gaunt, silver hair disheveled. He stood straight as the court clerk read the charges. The defendant is indicted on the following counts: kidnapping of an elderly person, second-degree murder, financial fraud and theft of a deceased person's property. Ellery responded with a curt, "Not guilty." Judge Janet Holloway declared the trial open. Chief Prosecutor David Lennox stepped forward, opening with a statement that hushed the room. On the morning of October 8, 1996, Eleanor Price brewed her final cup of tea. 26 years later, science has traced the hand of the man who ensured that tea would grow cold forever. He summarized concisely, the case was no longer speculation. All evidence, DNA, physical, financial, formed a chain of deliberate actions. The defendant not only took the life of a woman who trusted him, but used her identity for financial gain in the 2 years that followed. Defense attorney Alan Weathers countered in his opening statement, "Your Honor, my client is not a murderer. Eleanor Price's death was an accident, a slip in the rain. All evidence is circumstantial," and his only statement was extracted after hours of interrogation in a mentally exhausted state. The trial spanned 3 weeks, with numerous witnesses and experts called. The first week focused on scientific evidence. DNA expert Dr. Rebecca Sloan from the state lab detailed the genetic sequencing of the blanket sample, explaining forensic genetic genealogy. She projected images comparing 23 DNA loci from Ellery to the blanket sample, showing a 99.98% match. This sample could only belong to 2 people in the world, Mr. Ellery or his biological son, she said, but he has no children. Weathers attempted a rebuttal. Dr. Sloan, could the DNA have come from incidental contact while he worked on her house? Sloan replied firmly, no. The sample was found on the inner weave of the fabric, impossible from external handling. This indicates direct, close contact. The prosecution also called geologist Thomas Baird, who proved the soil on Eleanor's doormat matched the strata at Carolina Beach State Park, where the remains were found. The quartz and sea salt content in the soil matched to 4 decimal places. No other location in New Hanover County has a similar profile. The second week centered on investigative witnesses. Former investigator Kevin Moore took the stand. His hair white, voice low, his testimony was clear and forceful. He recounted the morning of 1996, when he first entered Eleanor's home. The radio was still on, the tea still warm. No signs of a struggle, just a long silence. I didn't know then I'd carry this case for life. He described the search, evidence sealing, and keeping a file copy for 20 years because I had a hunch the case wasn't over. The prosecution asked, "Do you believe this was an accident?" Moore looked directly at the defendant. "No, someone who accidentally kills doesn't withdraw the victim's pension for 2 years." During cross-examination, Weathers asked, "Do you have direct evidence proving the defendant intentionally caused her death?" Moore replied, "No one saw it, but there's evidence of choices, choosing to bury the body, not calling for help, and living as if nothing happened." The third week saw the prosecution play the February 19, 2023, interrogation recording, where Ellery admitted to holding her shoulders tight. Before playing, the judge reminded the jury, "This is admissible evidence, fully recorded, with the defendant's lawyer present." Ellery's voice echoed through the speakers, hoarse and low. "She trusted me more than anyone. I just wanted to help. She fell. I held her. Then she stopped breathing." The courtroom was silent. Lauren Ellis bowed her head, tears falling onto the blue blanket in her hands. The prosecution looked at the jury. "Did you hear that? It wasn't an accident. It's the confession of a man who believed control was love, that theft was protection." The defense objected, arguing the recording's tone didn't show intent to kill, but FBI psychologists testified that Ellery rationalized violent acts as helping. At the end of the third week, the prosecution closed with a summary. Jacob Ellery isn't a madman or a lost soul. He knew exactly what he was doing. He planned, took Eleanor Price from her home, and made her disappear. Both her life and her name, replacing it with authorized withdrawal. That's calculation, not an accident. Judge Holloway thanked both sides and gave the jury time to rest before deliberation. The prosecution exchanged slight nods. The defense remained silent. As the trial paused on day 20, late afternoon sunlight streamed through the courtroom windows, casting light on the long wooden benches. Moore stood, turning to Porter, his voice soft. 26 years, now just a few hours left. She nodded, eyes still on Ellery being led away, his back hunched, yet carrying the posture of someone who never believed he was guilty. The trial concluded on September 6, 2023, leaving Wilmington in a hush, awaiting the final verdict. Not just for one man, but for the persistence of justice after nearly 3 decades. On September 8, 2023, Wilmington was cloaked in mist and silence, as if anticipating something momentous. In courtroom 2 of the North Carolina Superior Court, every seat was filled, the public gallery packed with locals, press, and familiar faces who'd followed the case for months. The jury entered, 12 members, faces stern, holding a sealed envelope with the verdict, after over 8 hours of deliberation. Judge Janet Holloway tapped her gavel lightly, her voice clear and calm. The trial of State of North Carolina v. Jacob Allen Ellery resumes. Has the jury reached a verdict? The jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman, stood. Her voice trembled slightly, but was resolute. Your Honor, we, the jury, after reviewing all evidence and testimony, find the defendant Jacob Allen Ellery guilty of kidnapping of an elderly person under Section 1439 of the North Carolina Criminal Code, and guilty of second-degree murder under Section 1417. The courtroom was utterly silent. In the front row, Lauren Ellis clutched the blue blanket, bowing her head as tears fell onto her hands. In the witness row, Kevin Moore exhaled slowly, closing his eyes, as if shedding a burden carried for nearly 3 decades. Judge Holloway nodded, directing the clerk to read the full verdict. The clerk's voice rang steady. For the charge of kidnapping of an elderly person, the defendant is sentenced to 10 years in prison. For the charge of second-degree murder, the defendant is sentenced to 30 years in prison without parole. The sentences are to run concurrently, totaling 30 years in the North Carolina Department of Corrections. She paused, then read the court's additional ruling. The court recommends the defendant be transferred to a medium-security facility with a dedicated medical unit. The court acknowledges the defendant's partial cooperation during interrogation, but affirms this was a deliberate act with a financial motive, resulting in the death of victim Eleanor Price. Justice, though delayed, has been served. The judge signed the sentencing document. Case number 2023 CR 812, then looked at Ellery. Mr. Ellery, the court offers you a chance to speak. Do you have anything to say? Jacob Ellery stood, hands on the table. His face was pale, his voice hoarse but calm. I didn't mean to kill her, I just wanted to help. I still believe there are things you'll never understand. He paused, scanning the room, his gaze passing Porter, lingering on Moore. If I was wrong, let time prove it. Judge Holloway replied curtly. Time has proven it, Mr. Ellery. 26 years was long enough. She struck the gavel one final time. The court has ruled. The trial is closed. The gavel's sound cut sharply between past and present. Two officers approached, cuffing Ellery. He glanced back at the courtroom one last time before being led away. No remorse, only the exhaustion of someone with no more denials left. The metal door closed with a dry clank. Outside, late autumn sunlight filtered through the courtroom windows. Lauren Ellis approached Lieutenant Porter. Her voice choked. "Thank you for not giving up." Porter replied softly, "No one deserves to be forgotten, even after so long in silence." In the cold case unit office that afternoon, Moore sat alone at the old wooden desk, opening the case's final file. He flipped through pages, scene reports, the EP ring photo, the water's edge map, and finally, Judge Holloway's signed verdict. He picked up a pen, writing on the file's cover, Case hash 96221, closed. He set the pen down, looking out the window. Wilmington basked in late afternoon light, ocean breezes sweeping over rooftops, carrying a familiar murmur. 26 years ago, that morning held only silence and a warm cup of tea. Now that silence had been returned to its rightful owner, Eleanor Price, who could finally rest in the dawn of justice. The story of Eleanor Price's case is not just a 26-year investigation, but a mirror reflecting modern American society, where science, justice, and perseverance intersect to restore the value of truth. In a nation where the elderly increasingly live in isolation, Eleanor's image, an 81-year-old woman who trusted the wrong person and vanished without a word, is a stark warning about the ongoing abuse and exploitation of the elderly happening across America in ever more sophisticated forms: financial scams, psychological manipulation, property theft. Jacob Ellery, once seen as a kindly handyman, was the one who betrayed that trust. The betrayal of trust, not just the act of violence, is the deepest crime in this story. From a legal perspective, the case underscores the role of modern science and technology in justice. Genealogical DNA, geological analysis, and behavioral profiling not only solved a case, but proved that truth endures, waiting only for human persistence to uncover it. For Americans, it's a reminder that every piece of evidence, every data point, and every righteous act today can become tomorrow's justice. Above all, from Kevin Moore and Rachel Porter, who never let the cold case go, we learn a lesson of responsibility and resilience. In today's fast-paced, often indifferent America, Eleanor Price's story reminds us that justice isn't just in courtrooms, but in each of us, in how we keep promises, protect the vulnerable, and refuse to let silence swallow what's right. As Moore said, there's no magic, only science, time, and people who don't give up. If you believe justice can be found even after decades, subscribe to our channel to join us in uncovering truths hidden by time. Thank you for following Eleanor Price's story. See you in the next video, where another forgotten case reveals secrets never told.